welcome, and hello to the students in the audience. I recognize a few of you as well. Those of you who are going to stay for the debates, if you could please find a seat. There's plenty of room seating over here. Give the candidates their full attention, and it does take time, so you're going to end up on your feet, so it would be for quite a while, so it'd be better to sit down. This afternoon, we have a wonderful forum waiting for you guys. This is our U.S. Congress, District 16, which covers most of El Paso. These people, when they are elected, or if they are elected, will go to Washington, D.C. to represent El Paso up there. And so it's an extremely important race. And so what we are going to do is to ask them some very hard questions, and it's up to you guys to make sure that they come up with the answers you want to hear. And my name is Lynn Davis. I'm an associate professor here at El Paso Community College in political science. I have the pleasure of introducing the candidates to you right now. At the far end of the table, we have Barbara Carrasco. The next person is Paul Johnson. Then Beto O'Rourke. Mr. Luis Torres, who will be representing Mr. Sylvester Reyes today. And then Mr. Corey Rowan. And these are our candidates that will be here today. Right now, we're going to allow them to have a 2-minute opening so that they can introduce themselves to you. And there is a particular question that students in the earlier debate this morning said they wanted to hear from our candidates the answer to. And that question is, why are you running for this particular office? Why this one? Why not something else? Why this one in particular? And so in their opening remarks, see if they do a good job answering that particular question, okay? And what I'm going to do is we have them seated in alphabetical order. Mr. Torres is out of order, but because he is representing Mr. Reyes, he gets the R designation right there, okay? So we are going to start at the very beginning of the table. Ms. Carrasco, please feel free to answer our question in your opening remarks.
My name is Abeytia. Is this on? Can you hear me? My name is Barbara Carrasco, and I'm running for Congressional District 16, as she stated. I'm the third of 11 children. I've lived the American dream. My fear is that you will not be able to live the American dream based on the policies that this administration has recently passed. Our incumbent in this race has embraced our administration. They have saddled you with massive debt. 2 weeks ago, it was known that you are indebted to $134,000 to our debt already, and you've not even graduated. The reason I'm running for this race is because we do not have a voice, and we do not have our values represented in Washington. Instead, we have a voice coming from Washington and representing their values and their voice. And that is why I decided to run for this race. I want to make sure that you are able to live the American dream that I did. I don't want it lost, and that is what we're going to do. We're going to lose the American dream if we don't go to Washington and fight for your views and your values. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, please.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to this forum. My name is Paul Johnson, Jr., and I am running for the 16th District Congress. The reason why I got into this race, we need new leadership in Congress. Our current Congress has failed the American people too long. You people out here are young voters. You can make a decision on how this race is going to be. I am in this race to support everybody here in El Paso, everybody in the state of Texas, and as a congressman, you make laws throughout the whole United States. So we need to send somebody up there who's going to be representing the people. The people are the ones who elect us. The people are the ones who look up to us. And I am a person that will look to you for answers and take these answers to Washington to represent everybody here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. O'Rourke, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beto O'Rourke, and I am a Democrat running to represent you in the U.S. Congress. And to answer the question as to why I'm running for this seat versus any other seat, let me start by telling you a little bit about what I've been a part of along with you and others in this community. For the 6 years that I was on the El Paso City Council, I worked with you and many others in this city to make some very important and significant progress in quality of life. Those things that hopefully will attract and retain young people such as yourselves so that you stay here and invest your intellectual capital and talent and value in El Paso instead of moving to Austin or Los Angeles or New York or some other place in the world to do it there. We made progress on areas like downtown El Paso, like the Medical Center of the Americas, like our mass transit system, which was turned around from being one of the worst in the country to one of the best. Newsweek magazine, in fact, last year named El Paso America's #1 can-do city. We made more progress here than any other U.S. city across the country in important quality of life areas. My pitch is that it's time for us to take this can-do attitude that we've developed here in El Paso to Washington, D.C. We're suffering through 16 years of a failed status quo that affects all of us in our day-to-day lives. Let me give you some examples. We have the longest bridge wait times along the U.S.-Mexico border. That affects thousands of jobs in El Paso. We have a VA that recently ranked the worst in the country. That means we can't take care of the veterans who've taken care of us over these past decades right here in El Paso, their hometown. And far too many of you, far too many of our talented young people are leaving this community because there are not jobs and opportunities here. That's reflected in our 10% unemployment rate that we have today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, let's hold the applause until the end for everyone, okay? I'd appreciate it very much. Okay, Mr. Torres for Mr. Reyes.
My name is Luis Torres, and I'm the Legislative Director for Congressman Silvestre Reyes. I'm here today taking some of my own personal time to represent Congressman Reyes, who's in Washington, D.C. this week. The House is in session, and they will be voting, and he's there working for you. But I'm very proud to share some facts here with you about the record of Congressman Reyes. Over the course of the last 16 years, he's had the privilege and the opportunity to represent you. He's taken over 10,000 votes. Over 70 bills include language that directly benefits people here in El Paso. Language which has helped fund $125 million for the Sun Metro system, $91 million for the new Tornillo Bridge, $7 million for the Medical Center of the Americas, or millions more for the courthouse, for the passport office, and his votes. His votes have helped increase the Pell Grant, which many students rely on, has helped strengthen the federal work study program, have helped decrease those student interest rates, which many of you take out loans to pay for college. His votes have helped pass the DREAM Act in the House. The Republicans blocked it in the Senate. He's helped push comprehensive immigration reform and the Affordable Care Act, which he stands proudly by, and he supports our president. Congressman Reyes has been there for El Paso. He's worked very hard. In comparison, there are some people here in this room who voted to cut housing for people with disabilities, who fought against our police unions. There are people here, one of them, who voted to cut 150 jobs. Engineering and manufacturing jobs in the city could have taken initiative, but they didn't. They missed that leadership. So you have an opportunity to elect someone with no experience, no seniority, who doesn't represent your values, or a trusted and a proven man with experience who represents the voices of all of El Paso, not just the special interest, and that's Congressman Reyes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rowan, please.
My name is Corey Rowan. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army Reserve. That's experience. We're talking about experience here with Mr. Torres. 27 years in the United States Army. Back in 1985, I enlisted. I rose my hand. I did the oath of office. I said I'd support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Nothing's changed. That's still why I'm running. The job of a congressman is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, I have been deployed in combat twice. Been to Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I've been to Operation Enduring Freedom, just got back in September of 2011, just about 5 months ago. So I've led soldiers in combat. I think going to Washington, D.C. will not be a difficult adjustment from the leadership perspective that I have. I'm still in the Army Reserve right now. We're training units out of McGregor Range to actually go to combat. I'm a chief trainer there. I train battalion and brigade commanders how to run a staff, how to command a battalion and a brigade. So I teach leadership all the time when I put on the Army uniform. Now I got to Fort Bliss in 1990. About 2 weeks later, actually about a week later, I was actually in Saudi Arabian Desert Storm, and I've been here ever since. So I'm a small business owner here in El Paso. I understand what it takes to actually get the government off your back and make jobs. Big platforms that I have is we need a smaller government. Right now the government is way oversized. We need less taxes, and we can do that by putting in Republicans who understand that we can't be raising taxes all the time. So my name is Corey Rowan, and I'm running for Congress.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Please hold your applause until the end. Thank you. At this time, our panelists have their questions prepared, and we will begin the first question with Mr. Johnson, please.
Good afternoon. Some political figures have called for budget reforms, such as ending the Department of Education and leaving the funding to the states. Where do you stand in this attempt at preventing mismanagement of funds for education?
On education, funding from the state has failed miserably. When we had Speaking Rock Entertainment, they were willing to give some money to the state for our education, but the state, in its greed, wanted everything. So that's why Speaking Rock ended up getting closed. As your congressman will be sent to Washington, I will fight for the education and also make sure that bills are passed, that our Pell Grants and other grants for the students are made available for them, because I believe in a higher education. Not only do we need these Pell Grants and loans for these students, but we need to have an entrance rate where these students, when they graduate from higher education, they're not paying all their wages, but they may get back to a loan. So the loans need to be in a low interest rate for our students. A lot of us are from poor families, middle class, and we're not rich and have lots of money, but education plays a big portion here in El Paso, and with that education, we can bring more jobs here for the education.
Thank you. Mr. O'Rourke, please.
I think there are a number of areas that we can look to reform the federal government, try to cut back the $16 trillion in debt that we have, the over $1 trillion deficits that we're currently running budget to budget. But I don't think education is the place to start. And I think there's a critical role for the federal government in improving educational opportunities across the country, and especially in a community like El Paso. I start with early childhood education. The sooner we can invest in a young person's love of learning, in developing their intellectual curiosity, in making sure that they have creative approaches to the problems that they'll face in school and life, the better chance that that young person is going to stay in school, graduate from high school, go to college, and be a productive member of society. So I think it's critical that we do that. I also see a significant federal role in trying to recruit more math and science teachers in our middle schools and high schools. That's an area where we're clearly failing compared to many countries in the developed world, and we can and must do better. Another area where I think we could have some reform and perhaps use money a little bit more wisely is in a program like No Child Left Behind. As well-intentioned as that program is to hold schools, teachers, and students accountable for their progress, what we're doing is creating a generation of people who learn how to take a test, a generation of teachers who learn how to teach to a test, but we are forgetting those values that are so important to us being competitive in the academic world, like creating a lifelong love of learning, intellectual curiosity, some of these things that can't be tested so easily. Last thing is student loans. There's no way in the world I would have been able to afford to go to college without grants, loans, and work-study jobs. I want to make sure every El Pasoan has those opportunities to achieve that significant part of the American dream, which is getting a world-class education.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Torres for Mr. Reyes.
Well, that's just one of the ideas that some of these people up in Washington are floating around. Let me tell you, Congressman Reyes, after he came back from Vietnam, he graduated from the El Paso Community College. He's very proud of that, and he's very glad whenever he has the opportunity to come back here. He supports increasing the Pell Grant, which is administered, much of it, by the Department of Education. He supports expanding the work-study program, which many students use, which is also administered by the Department of Education. He also supports decreasing the student interest rates on loans, which, by the way, the oversight is from the Department of Education. For many years, banks were subsidized in the billions of dollars to provide you with those student loans. Billions, $61 billion went to banks. Congressman Reyes voted to eliminate those subsidies and put that money back into the Pell Grant so that your Pell Grant could increase instead of giving those subsidies away to these private banks and corporations. That's one reform we need to look at. There's a lot of people in Washington who are not looking at those common sense reforms. The Republicans are pushing for the Budget Control Act. The Budget Control Act would end Medicare as we know it. The Budget Control Act would enact across-the-board funding cuts for a variety of these departments, like the Department of Ed. Matter of fact, Mr. O'Rourke himself said he would have supported the Budget Control Act, which is quite disappointing because it could have and would have affected Fort Bliss here in El Paso locally. That is not leadership. Congressman Reyes understands the value of our community. Yes, we need to focus on STEM, we need to focus on engineering and math. He's been leading that conversation in Washington. Mr. O'Rourke in City Council voted to cut 150 engineering jobs. Where's the leadership in that? You need true and you need tried leadership, not talking points. And Congressman Reyes is that person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowan, please.
The Budget Control Act was already passed, so I don't know why you're pointing fingers at the Republicans. It was passed by both the House and the Senate and signed into law by President Obama. And yes, it does bring massive cuts around, but the first place, and the question was talking about budget reform, I don't know why they're cutting the budget on the backs of the military. These are people who have served, veterans, active duty. The last place we want to cut the budget is in our national defense. Secondly, the Department of Education came into existence in 1976 with Jimmy Carter, and the Republicans have been trying to either reform that, cut that back, or get rid of it altogether. Education belongs at the state and local levels. We do not need the federal government mandating no child left behind, exactly what test you have to teach to the test. The students are sitting in class. I got a high school student who's my son and a daughter who's in middle school, and they teach to the test. Okay, so that's the federal government's plan. Let's throw money at the states from the federal level. So I would say we need to definitely cut back the Department of Education. One thing that surprises me with Mr. O'Rourke is he comes from a very wealthy family. His father was a judge, his mother's a big businesswoman, and he always talks about how he would not have been able to make it through school without student loans. Okay, now he can probably rebut that, but I would think that student loans and grants should be more for people, the FAFSA, who actually need the money. I would also cut back definitely on Obamacare, which is actually adding $1 trillion. It costs $1 trillion. The Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, that's definitely a place. Once I get to Congress, that'll be, if I get the question later, what's the first thing I'm going to vote for? To defund and cancel the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby.
Do you mind repeating that question?
Some political figures have called for budget reform, such as ending the Department of Education and leaving the funding to the states. Where do you stand in this attempt at preventing mismanagement of funds for education?
There's studies out there that show that the more government intervention we have in our local schools and our colleges, the higher the tuition is. That's because the colleges are going to offset the monies that the government loans you. So the federal government should not have that much interface with our colleges. There are other options out there. Many universities are now experimenting with online courses. There are other ways for you to go to college without having to borrow money or go through the Pell Grants. So tying the Department of Education to the schools is a bad idea. Secondly, we have the, we have the No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. Those two were actually modeled after the Supplementary Education Act from the Civil Rights era, and it was to point out where the deficiencies were in which students were not learning in more poverty areas. So there was a positive to those. But they have recently found out that it is best to send the money to local localities so that the school districts can better utilize their monies, but that the federal government still has to set guidelines, set the bar higher for the schools to make sure that in fact they are teaching the Latinos especially and the African Americans, and that those students are getting the same education as the others, because they are the ones who are hurt the most when they don't teach to them and follow those guidelines from the government. So there is a place for the federal government, but it is not in control of all the monies or giving directives to the states on how to run their programs, to run the educational program.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question, and now please hold your applause till after the time is up, please. Next question, please, Mr. O'Rourke, you can address this one.
The Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act were initiatives that were addressed by both houses of Congress, which have, as of yet, not gone away. What is your perspective on future initiatives that are an attempt on online piracy at home and abroad?
As with many laws, the intent behind SOPA and PIPA was noble. We wanted to protect intellectual property rights. We wanted to give artists, whether they were musical artists, web artists, gaming artists, an incentive to create and sell their music or their production online, and not fear that people are going to pirate that and steal proceeds that would rightfully belong to them. Unfortunately, the way that these laws were written, they would do much more than that. They would have a chilling effect on intellectual property development, whether it's programming, whether it's music, whether it's art, and people's ability to share and have access to that online. We have to remember that one of the single greatest economic and jobs growth engines in this country right now is in the web, internet, and computer fields located in Silicon Valley, and really throughout the United States. We have a number of companies, even here in El Paso or in our state in Austin, that are benefiting from the innovations that we're making here in the United States. When we limit access to the internet, when we start to impose restrictive guidelines, it will start to deter people from investing their talent in these enterprises. It'll start to deter people from enjoying them, and it's absolutely the wrong way to go forward. So not only would I not have supported PIPA and SOPA, those kinds of acts in the future I would be wary of supporting. We need to encourage intellectual creativity and development and job growth in this country, not discourage it.
Thank you. Mr. Torres for Mr. Reyes.
Thank you. The Congressman has said publicly that he opposes SOPA. SOPA is not the right way to go about to bring security on the internet. There must be a balance. Some people, and most of you probably have followed the conversation, there were some people who were concerned about issues of pornography, hacking, software, piracy, and different issues that are very important. But SOPA was too broad. It was not effective, and the Congressman opposes SOPA. He's going to continue to do so. And we need to find a way, the Congressman would say, to try to foster the engineers, the mathematicians, the computer programmers that are going to help us target those issues. Because the way we stop those issues is by becoming smarter mathematicians, smarter engineers, smarter computer programmers. And one of the things the Congressman has done is in 2007 he founded the Diversity and Innovation Caucus. And this is a 69-member organization in Congress that is working to build more opportunities for underrepresented students, women, Native American, Latinos, African American, students with disabilities in the engineering and math fields. UTEP here and EPCC serve as good examples of schools that are fostering that type of knowledge, and we need more of that. I mentioned in my previous comment that Mr. O'Rourke on the City Council had voted to cut 150 engineering and manufacturing jobs. That's right. In 2010, Boeing wanted to expand its engineering and manufacturing base here in El Paso. They were asking the city for support. And the majority of the council said yes. Mr. O'Rourke said no. 150 engineering jobs or highly skilled manufacturing jobs paying $41,000 average salary. That's not how you foster the future engineers of El Paso. We need to bring those jobs. Congressman Reyes will bring those jobs. And he'll continue to be your leader if you keep sending them.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rowan, please.
Any federal law that increases the size and the scope of the federal government, for the most part, I'm going to vote against every single time. Now, yes, we don't want piracy taking place online, where an artist, for example, releases a song and then everybody gets to download it for free and record it. So we do need certain areas that need to be looked at. But the act that we're referencing here would have basically given the federal government opportunity to go down and shut down certain websites and say, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. I'd be definitely opposed to that. We don't want to regulate the internet any more than we have to. There's current laws out there talking about pornography that I would support. But going in and giving the federal government power to actually shut down different internet sites and even sites that are linked to other internet sites, I would definitely be opposed to.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Carrasco, thank you.
Okay. I'm against it. Number one, I'm running for Congress to reduce the size and scope of the government. To give them one more program so they can overreach is not my idea of going to Congress. That's what they have done with the Health Care Act. They've overreached. Now they're telling the religious institutions what they must and must not do. And that's how the government starts. They start out with a good idea, and then they push it too far, they push the envelope, and they continue to overreach into other fields. And we are losing our rights, our freedoms, by the federal government wanting to overreach. So we need a smaller government. Government does not have the answer for everything. An expanded government is not the way we want to go. Our freedoms, our liberties are given to us by a smaller government. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, please.
I would be against that 100%. And the reason why I'll be against that is when our federal government starts getting involved, then they look for loopholes which hurt our artists, our engineer people, our businesses that want to do business to bring jobs in our country. When the Piracy Act comes aboard, I could be in the military overseas and get a first-hand movie or a song before anybody else would even get it here in the United States. How is this? So for the federal government to get involved, to shut down sites just because somebody had done something wrong is wrong. We need to look at a better way to do this and not shut down our internet. Our students use our internet, or we communicate with our Facebooks and stuff, and our government does not need to be involved in that, and I would be against it.
Thank you, all of you. At this time, I would like to change the format just a little bit. If you feel like you need to respond to something that might be going on in the closing arguments, would you please address those issues? Okay. We have a lot of questions and not too much time left. Okay, next question, please. And it will go to Mr. Torres and Mr. Reyes.
Are you considering any policy changes to the EEOC anti-discrimination disclaimer used by colleges and universities across the state and nation that would promote cultural diversity and individual rights?
Well, the first thing I would say is that Congressman Reyes in the House has already supported a lot of anti-discrimination efforts. Congressman wrote it to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He's a co-sponsor of ENDA. He's a co-sponsor of the Safe Improvement Act. He was a co-sponsor and voted for the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act. He also is a co-sponsor of the Student ENDA, which addresses the issue that you're mentioning. And I would say yes, and as a matter of fact, the congressman wrote a letter to one of your student senators here, Crystal Tiveros, expressing his support to try to make sure that students, no matter what their race, creed, sexual orientation, or gender identity, are protected protected the same way that everybody else is protected, and that everybody feels comfortable and safe in the learning environment. That's the Congressman's position, and he's been very supportive. Aside from that, though, there are other people who we need to be supported. Students with disabilities, for example. Students with disabilities need our support. We have the Student Center up here on the second floor. Well, the Budget Control Act, which was brought up a little while ago, and yes, it was signed into law and it was forced down the House, the Congressman opposed it, would have made across-the-board cuts in programs that support students with disabilities. We need to unite the coalitions together so that we can protect everybody as much as possible. Housing issues are very important for the people in the community. I mentioned this before, there are people in this room who voted to cut housing for people with disabilities. Now they're asking you to send them to Congress, to gamble on them to represent your values. Well, those aren't El Paso values. People with disabilities should not be treated like that. And the Congressman has stood up, has protected the Americans with Disabilities Act, just like he is standing up to protect our students, all of our students, all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can you read the question again?
Are you considering any policy changes to the EEOC anti-discrimination disclaimer used by colleges and universities across the state and nation that would promote cultural diversity and individual rights?
Thank you, Mr. Rowan.
Now, we always need to be open, be critical thinkers. We need to look at what's going on and be able to look at something and possibly implement a change, okay? So no, I don't support right now the EEOC that needs to be changed. I do support that. However, I think we need to a lot of times get back in education, back to reading and writing and arithmetic, and sometimes the school systems and the curriculums, which is a local and state matter, gets off too much on issues that really should not be dictated by the federal government. Okay, so yes, we want to definitely help any of the underserved, the underprivileged. I'm a big believer in supporting the seniors, exactly how it is right now, strengthening Medicare for the future, strengthening Social Security, Medicaid. So I support all those, but I do think we need reform. We need to look at things, to do things better, cheaper, and more efficient.
Ms. Carrasco, would you please answer the question?
Yes. Everybody, regardless of race, creed, disability, is entitled to a good education. And that includes our returning soldiers and veterans with disabilities. They are also having problems assimilating into the government and getting into the private sector and getting jobs. So we need to encourage anything and everything, policies, regulations, rules that will assist people with disabilities. And we cannot discriminate based on anything. Everybody's entitled to an education. I was speaking to a few of the students here who have a disability, and they were telling me how difficult it is for them with their disability. I would encourage them, and I encourage the college to continue to work with these students. They need help, and we're all for helping anybody with a disability, and we cannot discriminate. We are all entitled to, you are entitled to, equal education, and that's what I will work for, to make sure that you don't lack in anything regarding your education because you are different than someone else. We all have an opportunity, and we should have the opportunity to continue our education, get our degrees, move on in life, and better ourselves in life, and do the best that we can for ourselves, and be the best that we can regardless of what disability we are, or how we feel, or how we think. That should not play a role in our education and how you enter the educational system.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, would you please take the question?
The anti-discrimination bill, I'll support that 100%. Our country, from the early 60s all the way up until now, has seen what discrimination can do against blacks, against whites, African Americans, against any race out there, and I will support this because our country is a lot better than what it is. We cannot discriminate against the elderly, our veterans coming back from the war, our senior citizens, We need a strong discrimination act so everybody is equal and everybody is fair on a playing field, so everybody can have the right education, the good health that they need, and not be discriminated in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, sir. Mr. O'Rourke?
The answer to the question is yes. I would do everything in my power to encourage and support an EEOC policy that encourages and protects cultural diversity and individual rights. I have a track record that I'm very proud of while I was on the city council. While there, I introduced an amendment to the city's budget to make sure that the same-sex partners of city employees were treated equally along with the heterosexual partners of married city employees. That to many of us makes a lot of common sense. It should be a no-brainer, but I can tell you that politically it wasn't easy and it wasn't convenient in terms of having to stand up to do the right thing. When those benefits were challenged by a group of people in El Paso and ultimately what I think is a misguided and poorly worded ballot initiative was passed that would have stripped those benefits away, I stood along with 4 other members of the City Council, including our Mayor, John Cook, to make sure that those benefits were restored. Again, that's not politically easy, it's not politically convenient, it's not 1 or 2 votes in the U.S. Congress, it's a vote that literally had the threat of recall associated with it. I want to say this about the Congressman's record on this, Mr. Reyes' record. Despite what his legislative directors just said, he voted to enshrine defensive marriage, which would not recognize same-sex relationships in the National Defense Authorization Act. And El Paso has a 3% ADA requirement for apartments. The national standard is 2%, so El Paso is 50% greater than what Mr. Reyes has supported at the federal government level. I'm very proud of what we've done at the city to support people's individual rights, to support diversity, and to support equality.
Thank you, sir. At this time, we're going to have another question asked by our panelists, and we'll start with Mr. Rowan, please.
In light of the presidential healthcare initiatives, as a candidate, what is your stance on access to contraception paid for by employers?
Okay, one of the first questions asked to me is what would I do, why am I running for Congress, and what would I do to actually, what would be one of the first bills that I would pass, and it would be, defunding Obamacare. That's one of the laws that was written into Obamacare when Nancy Pelosi said, we'll have to wait and see once it's passed what's in it. Very few people in El Paso, the city I want to represent, support that. We don't understand why it would be the federal government's job to mandate across the board that all insurance companies force them to provide contraceptives. Now, contraceptives are readily available. They're very reasonably priced, even cheap, and they're free for the most part for anybody who can't afford them. So no, I do not support that coming into law, and it's also more so a religious freedom. Basically, the government is coming in and telling the Catholic Church and other Christian churches and other religions, hey, you're going to do what we say because we're Big Daddy, we're the big federal government. Okay? So I would think that the majority of people in El Paso, reading the editorials in the El Paso Times, are very unsupportive of that particular law. And I'm very unsupportive of it as well. I would appeal the Obamacare as soon as I got jobs.
Thank you. Ms. Crosby, would you like to take that question?
Yes, regarding the health care bill, number one, it robs us of our ability to make our own health care choices. Number two, it's showing to you how a simple idea, not so simple, but how the federal government starts with an idea and then they overreach. But now they're telling the religious institutions what they should and should not do. They're blurring the lines between the separation of church and state. That's a constitutional right, separation of church and state. So no, I'm not in favor of anything where the government overreaches. I'm not in favor of another entitlement by the federal government. We cannot depend on every answer from the federal government. They are not the solution to every question we have. And especially now that they ordered the religious institutions to provide contraceptions, provide abortions in some cases. That's not the federal government's role. That's a private sector. That's a private decision that a woman makes. So the federal government should not be forcing any insurance companies, the churches, to do what they feel must be done. That's not the role, and that's why we need to stop, and we need to work to reduce the size and scope of the federal government, because we're losing our liberties and our freedoms. That's what an expanded government does, and we don't want to go there. We want to have and enjoy our country and our freedoms and our liberties. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, Mr. Johnson, would you take the question, please?
And again, this is a very interesting question. Our federal government has always been getting in our business. The federal government should not be in this type of business, and it's bad for the people. And like Margaret said, it infringes on our freedom that, you know, that our forefathers fought for. I, as your congressman, would be against this. This is totally unacceptable. We should not be involved in this. Our Congress doesn't have two simple words: common sense. Common sense for the will of the people. They don't understand what we do every day on a daily basis here. To get involved in our health care is one thing, but to come up with some really ridiculous ideas about contraceptives, our religion, our faith, or what type of person we can share our love with, that is wrong. That is not up to our government. That's up to our individuals in the private sector. That is what I'm running for Congress, to stop these little things that the government wants to do for us as American people and students as well. We need common sense in Congress, and that's what I'm about.
Thank you. Mr. O'Rourke, would you please take the question?
You know, I think the compromise that President Obama has arrived at with religious leaders and organizations on this issue is an appropriate one. The bottom line is that everyone should have access to contraception. And if it is difficult for a religious organization to provide that for their employees, there still must be means for those women to be able to access contraception. And to contrast with Mr. Rowan's point, it's not cheap, it's not easy to get. Ask any woman who is on the pill today, ask any woman who needs an IUD. Those aren't easy or cheap procedures. And we also must not lose sight of the fact that contraception is incredibly important for there to be equality in this world between men and women, and for the advancement of women in our country. The ability for a woman to choose when or if she will become pregnant, when or if she will have children, and the timing of those children is a huge advancement in women being able to enter the workforce and be competitive with men in the United States. There is a larger war on women going on right now, make no mistake about it. And unfortunately, Mr. Sylvester Reyes, who's been in Congress for the last 16 years, is part of this war on women. He voted to defund Title X. Title X provides access to family planning services for low to moderate income women, and it also provides access to cervical and breast cancer screenings and HIV screenings. There's no good excuse yet that I've heard from Mr. Reyes or from his legislative director, Mr. Torres, as to how he can vote for something like that would hurt so many women in this community. I think that's indefensible, and I think that's something that he must answer for.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Torres and Mr. Reyes, please take this question.
Sure, absolutely. Congressman Reyes stands behind President Obama's push to pass the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was important for El Paso, it was important for the country. Over 232,000 people in El Paso did not have health insurance, They were getting sick, they were not getting treated, they were going to the hospital and running up all sorts of debt. That was wrong. And the congressman said then, I will stand by my vote. I believe that if someone is sick, we need to treat them. If people don't like that, if people find that as a fault, then I will pay for it personally in my election. But the right thing to do is to make sure that more people have access to health care. With regards to the president's decision, there are many complicated issues. We need to respect faith. We need to respect a woman's ability to be able to have access to health care, we need to do that. And this country can do that. We can find a balance beyond the different rhetoric, attack on women, abortion, all these different things. Those types of words are not going to help us unite the country. They're going to divide the country. We need to be bringing people together. And that's what the Congressman has been trying to do. The Affordable Health Care Act provided maternity benefits in all health insurance plans. Health insurance plans are now required to provide maternity benefits. Believe it or not, insurance companies had the option of not providing that before. That's ridiculous. And the Congressman voted to fix that. Fix pre-existing conditions. Before, if you had a pre-existing condition and you wanted a health insurance plan, the health insurance provider could reject you because you had diabetes or because you had some sort of ailment that you were trying to work with. Congressman Reyes is fighting to protect health coverage for everybody, and the more we can do to provide people with those benefits, the more he will vote, he will cast those votes to protect them. And hopefully at the end of the day, you will see the benefits from this health care bill, which is already changing health care for the better in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. At this time, in the interest of time, we want to thank the students for being here. I know a lot of you have to go to your next class, but the candidates, I'm going to give them a chance to present their closing statements right now, so if you want to stay with that, I would appreciate it if you would. We'll begin with Ms. Carrasco and your closing statements, please.
As I stated in my introduction, that we're about to lose the American dream. You are not going to live the same American dream I did. We just got into the healthcare. He was mentioning the benefits of the healthcare. They neglect to tell you that the healthcare bill is costing 3 times as much as when it originally started. There's an $85 billion shortfall in healthcare that nobody's talking about. Where are we going to make up the money? They haven't told you that they gutted Medicare by $700 billion on a program that's already troubled. We have 30 million baby boomers retiring at $10,000 per day starting last year. They're taking from the system rather than paying into the system. Yet our congressman voted for a health care bill that hurt Medicare. He's voted for 2 payroll taxes that are taking money from Social Security, which is also a troubled program. We have the same 30 million baby boomers retiring at $10,000 per day, and we're getting tax holidays on a broken program. Does that make sense? We're not going to be able to leave you a legacy of a land of opportunity like we inherited from our parents.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, please.
In this election, it's going to be very crucial for El Paso. You're going to make a decision on which one of us is going back to Congress. Our current congressman has really failed the people of El Paso. But you're going to need to send somebody to Congress in Washington to represent the views of El Paso and this country. We need to send somebody who's going to be talking to the people. You are the people. You tell us what you want. I go to Congress and represent you and let you know that Washington, my people in El Paso wants this. You are getting in business, in our business, and you don't need to be in a lot of this business interfering with the people. We need a better health care system. What we have right now was put together, makeshift, and sent it out. Our congressman jumped on it, didn't even read the whole bill. He just signed off on it. So I would be honored to go to Washington before any bill was passed. I would read that bill. I would make sure that that bill is representing the people and not just the favoritism people that sit up in Washington and draw millions of dollars.
Thank you, sir. At this time, Mr. Rourke, do you closing argument?
Thank you. Why do we have 10% unemployment here? Why do we have a VA that in the congressman's 6th or 7th term in office ranked as the worst VA in the country? Why are young people leaving El Paso to go find opportunities elsewhere? Those are all the wages of the status quo. For the last 16 years, you've had the same person in Congress who's only passed 6 bills, who's missed more votes than almost any other member of Congress. And when he does vote, as I've made clear, he votes to zero out funding for women's health, for cervical and breast cancer and HIV screenings. and takes votes that are not in the interest of this community. You know, and I know, that there's a new spirit in El Paso where we can get things done. We must take that spirit to Washington, D.C. and stop accepting the excuses of a failed status quo that fails us here in El Paso and fails this country on the important democratic issues of this day. We need to send somebody up to D.C. who reflects this community's vision and ambition and shares that with the rest of the country. I would love to have your vote and support to get there, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Mr. Torres for Mr. Reyes, please.
It's been a great privilege for me to sit here to represent Congressman Sylvester Reyes who's in Washington working for you right now. And ladies and gentlemen, you have a very clear choice. You have a choice to send and elect someone to Congress with no experience, with no seniority, who voted to good housing for people with disabilities, who talks about jobs, but voted against 150 engineering jobs when they have the opportunity to do so, who fought against our police unions. I saw some of our officers here today. That's the choice. The other choice is to send a man who represents El Paso, the values, the story of a man who grew up on a farm, one of 10 kids, who went off to fight in Vietnam, came back, patrolled the border, one of the most powerful members of Congress, Hispanic members of Congress, graduated from El Paso Community College. That is Congressman Sylvester Reyes. You have that choice, and we hope that you exercise your right to vote on May 29th. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rowan, and thank you.
3 years ago, when the current administration took over, they promised hope, they promised change, they were going to really make a difference for our country. When President Obama took over, there were 12 million Americans that were unemployed. Now there's over 13 million who are unemployed. The unemployment rate at that point was 7.8%. Now it's 8.3%. Gas was $1.83, $1.85 a gallon. This morning I filled up, it was like $3.70. Things are not getting better. I am a Republican. I'm proud that I'm a Republican, and I'm going to make a difference for you. There's a lot of corruption in El Paso. I've lived the Army values for 27 years as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve, those who walked in late. And I'm a person who when I set out my mind to do something, I excel, and I will excel for the people of El Paso when you elect me to Congress to represent you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at this time, let's give our candidates a